Thank you very much for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about an application within Sage 100 Cloud called Business Insights Explorer. So the question becomes, what is Business Insights Explorer? And frankly, it's a little hard to define because it is many different things depending on how you use it. But primarily, it is an inquiry tool. It allows you to pull data from predefined data views that have been defined for each module. And within these data views, you can add and delete previously defined columns, but you can also add calculated columns and filtered data. But it is also an export tool. It's very easy to export data from these views to Excel or to text. And lastly, it is a reporting tool, which we'll cover in a future Sage 100 close-up, which allows us to group data together with some subtotals. Let's take a look at our agenda. So we're going to start by choosing a data view and going through how those data views are accessed. We're going to talk about changing some settings in Business Insights Explorer to make its use a little easier for you. And then we're going to take a look at some examples. So the first thing we're going to look at is the customer view. And we'll give you some examples about adding and deleting columns, adding calculated columns, and how to save your work for future use. And then lastly, I'll give you an example about a view called the Item Quantities by Warehouse, where we'll add a quantity available column. So let's go ahead and get started. So here I am in Sage 100. And if you'll notice, if we look at the module list, you'll see a module called Business Insights. And Business Insights has three different elements: Dashboard, Reporter, and Explorer. And today we're going to talk about Business Insights Explorer. So if I open up the Explorer section here, what you'll see is a listing of predefined views for each of the modules. And these are organized by module. Just kind of working our way from the top to the bottom, we have general ledger views, accounts receivable views, accounts payable views, inventory views, sales order views, purchase order views, etc. So you can access any of these views from here, or if you prefer, which is what I prefer, is to go to the actual module first and then click on the section called Explore and then open the view from here. So I'm under Accounts Receivable Explorer, and I will only see those views that are for accounts receivable, and I'm going to go ahead and open the customer view. So let's talk about changing some settings. So there's a very important setting that I want you to understand and probably need to change. So if we go to the Tools menu and go to Options, you'll see various options here, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about all of the options here, but I do want to go to the Data tab. And there's a couple of things to be aware of here. First of all, there is an option to automatically load the data when you first access the view or when you make a change. And I'm going to recommend that you disable this function, because sometimes when you add data into these views, it could take a long time to load the data. And what we find in the real world is we often filter this data anyway if it's a large data set. For example, let's say I was loading data from accounts receivable invoice history. Well, I might have invoice history going back several years, and it can take a long time to load all that data just to have me filter it just for invoices for last month, for example. It's much faster to filter the data and then load it than to load it and filter it. So I do recommend that you disable this option to automatically load data when view setting is loaded or changed, so that you're not dealing with that time problem with it trying to load the data. In fact, I've seen in some installations that loading of that initial data actually just doesn't work. It's trying to load too much data, then we try to stop it, then we get an error, then we get frustrated, and we think Business Insights Explorer doesn't work at all. So please disable this function. The other function that shows up here is row count limit. So by default, when you first go in here, you'll see that your row count limit is set to 1,000 rows. So what happens is if what you're loading is more than 1,000 rows, you'll get a prompt saying we've loaded 1,000 rows and it will stop. So once again, I recommend you disable this function. Now, these options are specific to this workstation. So unfortunately, these are not global options. They're specific to the user and workstation that's accessing Business Insights Explorer. So on your workstation, as you're doing this, I just recommend you make these changes. So notice that when I went into this view, there's no data, and that's because I have the option set not to load the data. To load the data, then what I need to do is hit the refresh button. Now in this example, I'm not filtering the data in any way, and I'm just going to have a list of customers here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I don't have a very large data set. If I look at the bottom of my screen, you can see that there's 21 rows here, and it's listing all of our customers, and we have various columns of information. So we have division number, customer name, whether they're on hold, some aging information, salespeople, credit limit, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can remove columns from the list and how you can add some columns. So first of all, if you want to remove a column from the list, let's just take this fax. You can just drag it off the screen. Or you push this button over here and you can click the button and add it back, or deselect the button and it will go away. So you can go through and add and delete columns this way. But what you'll get here with the button over on the left-hand side are only those columns that are predefined for this particular view. But the reality is we have access to every table that is defined in this view. So to access other columns, you can go to any column and right mouse click and go to column settings and then press the add button, and then you can add any columns from any of these tables. So for example, if I want to add the terms code description, I can add that column. And then once again refresh, and if I scroll to the right, you'll see that the terms code description has been added. We have no capability of modifying the view to add additional tables. However, if you've added user-defined fields to any of those tables, they are available to add to the view as you are adding those columns. So that's how you can add and delete columns. But we're going to take a look at some of this aging information for a moment. So if we know something about Sage 100, we know that in accounts receivable, we get to define our aging categories. So in my system, my aging categories are 30, 60, 90, 120 days. So I've got an aging 1 column here, and I'm going to right mouse click, go to column settings, and I'm just going to change the caption to 30 days so that I know that that's what that means. I'm going to do the same thing for aging category 2. We're going to change that to 60 days. So you can change these for whatever your aging categories are in your system, obviously. And this is 90 days. And then this one is 120 days. Now, however, notice that we don't have a column for total amount due, something that we might see on a statement or an aged invoice report. And we also don't have a column for the amount that's past due. So I'm going to define past due as the sum of all of the dollars that are in the 4 aging categories. In other words, if it's not in the current column, I'm going to consider it past due. So I'm going to go to a column header, doesn't matter which one, and right mouse click and go to column settings, and I'm going to add a calculated column. And I'm going to give it a name. So I'm just going to call it past due. And then I'm going to do a calculation here. And I'm going to pull this data from the AR customer table. And I'm going to pull aging category 1 plus aging category 2 plus aging category 3 plus aging category 4. I'll say OK, and I'll format that as numeric and refresh. And once again, clear on the right-hand side, I now have those numbers. But it's not in a position where I want it. So another real nice thing about Business Insights Explorer is we can just pick up any column and drag it where we want it. So I'll drag it right there. So I can now see for each of my customers what the current balance is and what the past due balance is. Now I've just noticed that I probably should have formatted this as currency, so let's go ahead and just change that to be consistent with the other ones. Now let's go ahead and add another column for total balance due. So once again, I'm going to right mouse click on any column, go to column setting, and add another calculated column. And I'm going to call it total due. Now my expression here is, once again, I could add together aging categories 1, 2, 3, and 4 plus the current balance, but since I already have a calculated field for past due that adds those 4, I'll just use it instead of creating it again. And now I'll add from my customer table the current balance. We'll say OK. Once again, format that as currency, say OK, and pick it up and we'll drag it over to the left here. So we'll put that somewhere in there, and we'll actually drop it over one more, and then we'll load the data. So very cool. Now we know how much is total due from each customer. So another feature of Business Insights Explorer is that you can sort by any of the columns. So if I want to know which customer has the highest amount total due, I can just sort this in descending order, and I can see that Shepherd Motorworks is the customer that owes us the most amount of money. So I don't have to go into each individual customer. I don't have to run an aged invoice report and then glance through the report to find this information. I have it at my fingertips right here. So since we've done all this work, we don't want to lose it. We want to save it. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this as a new setting. So if we'll look at the top here, we'll see that the setting here is called the standard setting. And if we look at the menu, there's an option to save the setting. And we could do save setting or save setting as, and we can give it a name. Now, when you save settings, there are two different ways to save them. You can save them as either public settings or as private settings. If you save the setting as a public setting, all users who have access to this Business Insights Explorer view have access to that particular setting. If you save it as a private setting, only you have access to this setting. Now, I really like public settings because if you do this work and you have other people that want to be able to see it, that's perfectly fine. But just give you an example, let's say you have 5 different users, each creating 4 different views, and they're all saving them as public. That's 20 different settings that you would have access to just for this one view. But we'll go ahead and save it as a public setting. So I'll do save setting as, we'll just call it past due. I'll come back in our next example here. We'll call that one up. So let's go ahead and close that for now. And let's move on to another example of another view. So I'm going to go to Warehouse Management, Explore, and Item Quantities by Warehouse View. And let's go ahead and run this. Now what this is basically the data that you see at the bottom of the inventory item maintenance or inquiry screen that shows you the quantity on hand, on sales order, on purchase order, et cetera, for each warehouse for that item. Except in this view, you see this information for all items and all warehouses. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a calculated column for quantity available. And I'm going to define quantity available as quantity on hand minus quantity on sales order minus quantity on back order. Now notice I have a couple of columns for work order here, and I'm just going to get rid of those because we're not using work order. And in this example, we're not going to use any of these values either. So we just have quantity on hand, quantity on PO, on sales order, and back order. Let's just move the quantity on PO to the right. So once again, I'm going to right mouse click, go to column settings, and I'm going to add a calculated column, and I'm going to say available. And when I say available, what I'm going to do is go into my tables and take the quantity on hand, and I'm going to subtract quantity on sales order and subtract quantity on back order. And we'll make this numeric. We'll say OK, and we'll refresh. So now we have quantity available here. So once again, I can sort this information, things like that. But another thing that we can do is we can filter the data. So maybe all I care about here is any inventory item where the quantity available is less than 0. So I'm going to open up a filter builder, and I'm going to filter this data by adding a filter where the quantity available is less than 0. And there we go. So as you can see, it's very easy to access the data, to sort the data, to filter the data. I could filter by a warehouse, I could filter by an item, any of those kinds of things as I do this. Now, before I leave this view, one other thing I want to take a look at here is maybe I just want to look at more information about this particular item. Maybe I want to look at some transactions or something like that. Well, another feature of Business Insights Explorer is the capability of drilling down to the data. So I'm going to right mouse click on the item, go to task, and go to item maintenance. And that's going to open item maintenance for that selected item. And when I'm in item maintenance, I obviously can look at transactions, look at history, whatever it is that I want to look at. Now, when I close this, I'm right back to this filtered list. And I can't do this anywhere else in Sage 100. This capability of being able to filter this list, drill into the item or the entity, depending on what it is, and then close that drill down and come back to the list is really, really cool in my opinion. So let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of our agenda here for today. So the last thing I want to talk about is the fact that Business Insights Explorer, in addition to being an inquiry tool, is an export tool. And to do that, we're going to go back to that customer view. We're going to filter that list, and we're going to export the data to Excel. So here we are back in Sage 100. Let's go back to accounts receivable and our customer view. And if I do a drop down at the setting up here, you can see that I have my saved setting I just did a little while ago. So I'll go ahead and select that, refresh the data, and I'm right back to where I was a moment ago. Now remember, I sorted this in descending order, but maybe what I want to do in this example is filter this much like I did for the other view. I just want to filter this for any customer where the current balance is greater than 0. So I showed you how to use the filter builder. And the filter builder can be used to do multiple criteria in your filter. But there's also another way to filter. You can just use the drop down here, and kind of like Excel, you can select various values, or you can just say custom, and you can say where the current balance is greater than 0 or not equal to 0. Let's do not equal to 0. Does not equal 0. Now, the filter builder has more capability. So when you play with this, pretty soon you'll figure out what you can do with the drop-down filter versus the filter builder. There are some operands that are available with the filter builder that are not available here, but a simple filter is easy to do. So we'll just do that. So now I have a list of customers where the current balance is not equal to 0. Now, what if I want this list in Excel? Well, frankly, this is one of the easiest ways to get data out of Sage 100 and into Excel, because all I'm going to do is go to the File menu, choose Export, Options, and then Microsoft Excel. And that's going to export this list directly to Excel, just like that. Now, Excel does its normal formatting thing, so it's stripped the leading zeros off a division, but very easy to get the data out to Excel. So let's review what we talked about. We talked about choosing the data views, either by going to the module first or going to Business Insights and then choosing Explore. We talked about changing a couple of those settings so that the data does not automatically load, and it also doesn't restrict the number of rows in the view. We went through an example of using Business Insights Explorer as an inquiry tool, first under customers and then under item quantities by warehouse. And then we talked about how easy it is to export data to Excel as well. Thank you for joining us today. Please subscribe to our channel and our user group. There's our user group. Our website is www.nimsassociates.com, where we will post links to some of these sessions. If you need to contact us, you can send an email to erp@nimsassociates.com or call the number on your screen.